Hello and welcome back, curious mind. Somewhere beneath your garden, in the hollow of a rotting tree, or beneath a rusted metal sheet, something ancient is being drawn, not with pencils or compasses, but with legs, wings, and instinct. A wasp hovers, lands, and begins to chew wood. Not randomly, not chaotically, with purpose. She mixes the pulp with her saliva and begins to build paper-thin walls shaped with precision, and soon, from nothing but spit and instinct, emerges a nest of perfect hexagons. Elsewhere, in the sticky interior of a beehive, thousands of workers are doing the same, secreting wax, shaping it into cells, each with 6 equal sides, repeating, repeating, repeating. They don't measure, they don't plan, they don't make drafts, and yet their architecture would humble a mathematician. The honeycomb isn't just beautiful, it's optimal. Of all possible shapes, circles, triangles, squares, only the hexagon perfectly fills a plane without gaps or overlaps, while using the least amount of material for the most storage. It's the most efficient use of space and resources, and insects arrived at it first. Long before humans carved geometric patterns into cave walls, long before the Greeks named theorems, insects were building like this, quietly, precisely, in the shadows. But how? How do creatures with no formal education, no conscious geometry, and brains smaller than a sesame seed create patterns that obey mathematical principles? How does a wasp know how to partition space? How does a bee know how to align wax into tessellated fields? Is it instinct? Is it evolution? Is it something deeper? This question is not about intelligence in the way we usually think of it. It's about embodied knowledge, a kind of internal compass, a memory older than memory, one that lives in the angles of legs and antennae, in the heat of wax, in the tension of silk. Insects, it seems, are born with geometry in their blood. But why? Why does nature favour certain shapes? Why is the hexagon everywhere? In snowflakes, in basalt columns, in compound eyes, in nests. And why is it insects, not birds, not mammals, who appear to wield this shape so consistently across species, across ecosystems, across eras? The answer isn't simple. It's buried in physics, in biology, in heat and wax, and evolutionary pressure. But tonight, in this quiet space of thought, we'll dig. We'll follow the ants and bees and wasps through their worlds, through tunnels and combs and silken threads, and we'll try to understand, not just what they build, but how they know. And perhaps in doing so, we'll come to see geometry not as something we discovered, but as something that lives, even in the tiniest bodies, even in the dark. To the human eye, a beehive is a place of chaos. So many wings, so much movement, drones crawling, workers zipping in and out, larvae being fed, nectar being fanned, wax being secreted. But look closer, zoom in. Beneath the hum and bustle, a pattern reveals itself. Quiet, consistent, astonishing. The honeycomb, sheet after sheet of hexagonal cells, uniform, interlocking, tilted slightly upward to hold liquid, angled precisely to conserve wax, each wall at 120 degrees, each side equal, each junction perfectly aligned. This isn't just structure, it's intelligence made physical, and yet no bee designs it, no bee draws a blueprint. Each worker bee contributes by instinct, by feel. She secretes wax from glands on her abdomen, warms it with her body, shapes it with her mandibles. She builds the walls thin, about 0.1 millimeters, lighter than paper, but strong enough to hold weight. And together, thousands of bees build a structure that has puzzled and inspired humans for centuries. The Greek mathematician Pappus of Alexandria, back in the 4th century, admired the honeycomb as the hexagonal problem, a solution to how to divide space most efficiently. He believed bees had a geometrical forethought, and in 1999 researchers confirmed what bees had seemingly always known. The hexagon uses less wax than any other shape to store the same volume of honey. It's the most efficient shape in 2 dimensions. But bees don't know this. Or do they? That's where it gets strange. Bees don't know geometry in the way a human student does. They don't derive equations or reference textbooks, but they enact it. They manifest geometry as behaviour. It's not thought, it's emergent. Some theories suggest that the hexagonal pattern results from physical laws, like soap bubbles that naturally form hexagonal tilings when compressed. Perhaps the wax, heated by bee bodies, flows and solidifies in this shape on its own. Others argue that bees actively shape the hexagons, that they push and pull with precision, adjusting based on temperature, vibration, or even dance. The truth may lie in both. The wax softens, the bees nudge, the cells align, and the math appears. A distributed intelligence, no single bee understanding the whole, but each doing her part, and the result being mathematically perfect. It's not magic, it's collaboration without comprehension. And that is what makes it so compelling, because it asks us to rethink what we mean by intelligence. Does a system have to know what it's doing to do something well? Do we? When you walk across a room, you don't calculate the geometry of your steps. Your body does it for you. Instinct, balance, feedback, correction. The bee too builds through feedback. She senses the angle of her last wall, the warmth of the wax, the smell of the queen. She adjusts, she continues. And somehow, without seeing the whole, without understanding the theory, she creates a structure that even humans find difficult to replicate with machines. So maybe it's not that bees know geometry in the abstract. Maybe it's that geometry lives in their biology, in their behaviour, in the rules of their collective. It's not a conscious knowledge, but it is real, it is precise, it is beautiful, and it's been buzzing quietly beneath our feet for millions of years. Imagine being the size of a grain of sand, with no GPS, no flashlight, and no map. Only your body, your senses, and a colony's silent rhythm to guide you. Now, imagine building a city beneath the earth. That's what ants do. They carve tunnels, they build chambers, they create ventilation shafts and food storage rooms. Some nests are small, some stretch meters deep, housing millions. And they do it all without a leader, without blueprints, and, most mysteriously, with a kind of geometric consistency. Open an abandoned ant nest and you'll see it, a fractal logic. Chambers spaced in patterns, tunnels meeting at angles, air vents aligned with the prevailing wind. It's not random, it's rule-bound, but the ants don't know they're following rules. Each ant reacts to local cues, a scent trail here, a humidity shift there, the vibration of digging legs ahead. She digs a little, feels the air, turns left, turns right, moves forward. Multiply that by thousands. Let them do it for weeks. And soon you have an underground world that rivals our own. Ventilated, navigable, sustainable. Scientists have poured plaster into ant colonies to see the full structure. What emerges is jaw-dropping. Branching networks, self-similar at different scales, shaped by simple behaviour, yet mathematically robust. Some resemble tree roots, others mimic neural pathways. Some follow Eulerian paths, mathematical routes where every edge is touched once. It's tempting to say ants understand geometry, but again, that's not quite right. What they do is build according to feedback. When one tunnel gets too long, it curves. When heat builds up in one chamber, they vent it. When food is found, they widen the route. Over time, this becomes pattern. Pattern becomes geometry. Geometry becomes design. And we, watching from above, marvel at the result. But for the ants, it's just life, just another day in the dark. There's a deeper point here. Ants aren't drawing triangles in the soil. They're not building shapes for aesthetics. Their geometry emerges from constraint and need. from solving problems using what's available. And maybe that's what geometry really is, not a subject in a textbook, but a response to reality. When space is limited, how do you divide it? When heat rises, how do you cool? When paths overlap, how do you avoid confusion? Ants answer these with curves, branches, spirals, gradients. Each ant is dumb, but the colony is smart. It's distributed problem solving, and it results in something that looks like intention, but is really evolution's memory, built into a million legs. Geometry, in this case, isn't taught, it's grown, and somehow it still fits the rules we humans write with ink and ruler, the rules that nature wrote first. Now look up, high above the soil and the honeycomb, above the roots and the flowers, a different kind of geometry unfolds, one made not of wax or tunnels, but of air. The dragonfly doesn't crawl, she slices. She hangs in the sky like a thought, like a blade held still, wings moving independently, beating in rhythm and counter-rhythm. And the air obeys her. She can hover, glide, dive, even fly backwards, something most insects can't do. And her secret? Geometry. Not just in how she moves, but in how she's built. A dragonfly's wings are masterpieces of natural engineering. If you look at them under a microscope, you'll see an intricate lattice, geometric veins, forming repeating polygons across the surface. Triangles, hexagons, quadrilaterals, not decorative, but functional. These shapes add strength without weight. They prevent fractures from spreading. They dampen vibration. They flex just enough to allow control, but not so much as to lose power. In fact, researchers studying dragonfly wings found that their vein layout isn't random. It's optimized for the physics of flight, distributing stress, reducing fatigue, allowing for micro-adjustments mid-air. Some engineers now use dragonfly wing patterns to design drones and micro-air vehicles, trying to replicate the balance of rigidity and flexibility. But it goes deeper. Dragonflies have two pairs of wings, and unlike most insects, they can move them independently. That allows them to change lift and thrust on each side. It's a bit like rowing with four oars, each one turning and dipping at a different angle, except you're flying. And the geometry of that motion, the phase difference, the stroke amplitude, the wing beat frequency, is something researchers are still unraveling. We can map it with equations, but the dragonfly doesn't need to. She knows it in her body, in the tilt of her wings, in the muscle twitches that evolved over 300 million years. She flies through invisible geometries, air pressure gradients, vortices, lift curves. She doesn't see them, but she reads them. And in doing so, she becomes part of them. Every turn she makes is a response to space. Every hover is a balance of forces. Every wing beat is a calculated solution to a constantly shifting equation. But she doesn't calculate. She just is. She just flies. And again, we're left with the same question. Is this intelligence? Or is it something older? Is geometry just a human lens we use to describe what the dragonfly has always done? Or is the dragonfly embodying geometry in ways we're only beginning to understand? Either way, she reminds us, that shape matters, that motion follows form, and that sometimes the best mathematician is an insect in the wind. In the early morning light, dew settles on a web. Each droplet catches the sun, turning the strands into silver lines, a fragile net cast between branches. You might stop and stare. You might admire the symmetry, the delicacy. But have you ever wondered how? How does a creature with no formal training create something so stunningly geometric, so mathematically elegant, without ever seeing the whole thing at once? This is the spider's gift, and it's all done by touch. Let's pause for a moment and picture the process. A spider begins her web by finding an anchor point, a twig, a leaf, the corner of a window pane. She releases a single line of silk into the breeze. When it sticks, she tightens it, her first axis. Then she builds a frame. Then she adds radii, lines that stretch from the center outward, like the spokes of a wheel. And then, and only then, she spins the spiral, beginning at the center and working her way outward, or vice versa, depending on species, placing each coil equidistant from the next. She doesn't measure. She doesn't stop to step back and look. She just moves, by feel, by memory, by the tension of the silk beneath her feet. And what results is astonishing. A near-perfect polar coordinate system. It's not random looping. It's not chaos. It's math in motion. Even the spacing of the spiral follows rules that resemble logarithmic functions, expanding outward in ratios that maintain balance and efficiency. Different species build different types. Orb webs, the classic wheel-like form. Sheet webs, horizontal planes laced with trap lines. Funnel webs, spiral sheets that descend into a silken cave. Each is tailored to environment, prey and body type, but all rely on tension geometry, a harmony between flexibility and strength. Some scientists believe spiders use their webs as sensory maps, each strand tuned to a different frequency, like strings on a harp. Vibrations from wind, prey or rival spiders travel along these lines and tell her exactly where to move. This turns the web into more than a trap. It becomes a listening device, a map of her world, an extension of her body, and she builds it anew each night, over and over again, with precision, with care, with a mindless elegance that makes you wonder, is geometry really about thought, or is it about repetition and constraint? Give an animal silk, wind and hunger, and it will solve the problem with lines. But these lines aren't random. They form a language, one of angles, symmetry, proportion, and rhythm. A web isn't just art, it's architecture. It's a record of decision-making, moment by moment, as the spider moves across space, adjusting, sensing, spinning. A poem written one line at a time, without ever seeing the page. And yet somehow, it makes sense. To the human eye, a butterfly's wing is magic. It shimmers, it flashes, it changes with the angle of light. It feels like art, like a stained glass window, gifted to the world by chance. But under a microscope, it becomes something else entirely. Geometry. A butterfly's wing isn't smooth. It's covered in tiny scales, flat plates layered like shingles, arranged in an overlapping pattern that follows precise grid alignments. These scales aren't placed randomly. They form rows and columns, often in Fibonacci spirals or fractal-like arrangements. Each scale contains pigments or is built with microscopic structures that manipulate light through interference, scattering, and diffraction. That's how butterflies get those iridescent blues and fiery greens, not from dye, but from nano-architecture. Colour here is a result of geometry at the microscopic scale. Some of these structures are shaped like ridges, others form photonic crystals, repeating patterns that interact with light like a prism. It's the same principle that gives peacock feathers their shimmer, or the gleam of a CD under sunlight. But the butterfly's implementation is far more efficient. Some species, like the morpho, can be seen from hundreds of meters away, not because of colour alone, but because of how their wings scatter light in all directions. This scattering is not random, it's engineered by evolution, and each scale plays a part. Each one is a tile in a tessellation, contributing to an overall optical effect. Some species arrange their wing scales in gradients, creating subtle shading for camouflage. Others use them to create eye spots, mimicry patterns, or even polarized signals readable only by members of the same species. It's not just beauty, it's communication, it's survival, it's math. Researchers studying butterfly wings are now using their patterns to develop anti-counterfeit materials, colour-fast textiles, and biomimetic sensors. Why? Because it turns out that the way butterflies structure their scales is more advanced than many of our synthetic systems. Once again, an insect with no language, no science, no chalkboard, has crafted a solution to a complex physical problem, using nothing but inherited instinct and silent rules. And those rules? They look a lot like the ones we call geometry. So the next time a butterfly flutters past you in the sunlight, remember, it is not just beauty you're seeing, it's precision. It's mathematical craftsmanship at the cellular level. It is the work of countless generations, refining shape, size, angle, and placement, until what remains is a message written in light. And the author? A creature that's never read a thing, but knows the language of colour better than we ever could. The sun is hot, the grasses sway, and rising from the ground like alien spires are great towers of mud, termite mounds, some as tall as a grown human, others reaching 3 meters or more. Not piles, not lumps, but structures, complete with ventilation shafts, central atria, moisture chambers, and cooling columns. Cathedrals, really, built not by machines, not by blueprints, but by millions of tiny blind insects following simple rules over time. And the result? A feat of environmental engineering so advanced that human architects have studied it to design buildings with passive climate control. The termites don't set out to build masterpieces. They're just regulating their home, managing temperature, humidity, and air exchange. But because of how they build, slowly, socially, incrementally, their mound becomes an emergent geometry. Tunnels spiral around a central core, walls curve to channel airflow, exterior ridges collect morning dew. Some species even align their mounds north-south, minimizing sun exposure and preventing overheating. How? That's the mystery. They're blind, they don't plan. Each termite carries a bit of mud or sand and drops it near where others have been working. They're guided by pheromones, air currents, and the feel of the structure under their feet. They respond to local conditions. When it gets too warm, they dig upward. When it cools, they close vents. These tiny changes, repeated across millions of workers, create macroscopic order. It's not that any termite understands the whole, but collectively, they craft a space that regulates itself. A space shaped by thermodynamics, fluid flow, material efficiency, all channeled through the instincts of insects who never step outside their own walls. In the 1990s, engineers began scanning termite mounds using MRI and 3D imaging. What they found resembled computer simulations of optimal airflow. The mound acts like a lung, breathing in and out as wind flows over its surface. Internal temperatures remain stable, even when outside air swings wildly. And the termites, they go about their business, feeding the queen, growing fungus gardens, expanding the tunnels a millimeter at a time. Their geometry is not decoration, it is function sculpted into form. And from it we learn something profound. That design doesn't require foresight. That intelligence can emerge from repetition, feedback, and correction. And that sometimes the most breathtaking architecture in the world comes from those who've never once seen it whole. We've talked about what insects build, but what if geometry begins even earlier, before the tunnels, the combs, the wings, the webs, before even the hatching? Inside the egg, consider this. Many insect eggs are shaped not just for survival, but for placement, alignment, and efficiency. Some butterflies lay eggs in tight spirals on the underside of leaves. Wasps layer their eggs in concentric rings. Some ants place eggs in clusters that match the maximum packing arrangement, the same way oranges are stacked in a crate. Why? Because it's the most efficient use of space. And while the mother insect doesn't calculate the packing density or solve equations, her behaviour leads to patterns that mirror what mathematicians later call hexagonal close packing or circular symmetry. Let's go smaller. Zoom into the embryo. As it develops, the cells divide and arrange themselves into layers. Gastrulation, morphogenesis, all the early steps that sculpt the insect's form. And here too, we find geometry. Gene expression follows gradients. Chemical distributions that create bilateral symmetry. Body segmentation, limb placement. These aren't guesses, they're spatial patterns dictated by molecular rules. The Drosophila fruit fly, a common lab subject, has been studied so extensively that we now know exactly how its body plan unfolds. And what's striking is how often these biological systems mirror geometric logic. Take the fly's eye, for instance. It's made up of hundreds of ommatidia, tiny lens units arranged in a perfect hexagonal grid, like tiles on a dome. Each ommatidium points in a slightly different direction, giving the fly a mosaic view of the world. And their arrangement? Once again, the hexagon wins, because it allows the densest packing of identical circles in 2 dimensions, because it provides even coverage, uniform vision, because it is nature's favourite tiling, and it forms not through trial and error, but through gene-regulated cell migration, adhesion, and spacing signals between cells. It's developmental geometry, a kind of internal cartography written in proteins and gradients. What does this mean? It means insects don't just build geometry, they are geometry. From the moment their cells begin to split, from the first spirals of DNA expression, from the placement of eyes to the angle of wings, their bodies follow rules that echo those found in mathematics. Not because math guides them, but because evolution has favoured efficient, stable, symmetric structures, and geometry is the language of such structures. So when we ask why insects know geometry, maybe the answer is this: they don't, but their bodies do. Their biology does. Their instincts have been shaped by millions of years of trial and refinement, and the shapes that survive are the ones that work. And the ones that work are often the ones that align with geometry. You've seen bees fly to flowers, ants march in trails, butterflies migrate thousands of kilometres. But here's a question: how do they know where they're going? No maps, no stars, no signs, just tiny bodies and the geometry of space. Some insects use scent, others follow the sun, but some, and this might be the most remarkable of all, read the Earth's magnetic field. That's right, they sense magnetism, like a built-in compass, and they use it to align their movements, build their homes, migrate vast distances, and return to places they've never seen. Let's take the monarch butterfly. Every autumn, millions of monarchs across North America begin a journey. From Canada and the northern US, they fly thousands of kilometers south to a patch of mountain forest in central Mexico. They've never been there before. Their parents didn't teach them. They were born in summer, lived a few weeks, and now they just know. They follow a route that bends with the curvature of the Earth, adjusting for wind, sun angle, and magnetic pull. That last part, magnetic pull, is where it gets interesting. Studies show that monarchs have tiny magnetite particles in their bodies, crystals that align with the Earth's magnetic field. These crystals may send signals to the nervous system, acting like a compass needle. Other insects, like honeybees, show similar sensitivity. In lab experiments, bees trained to forage in specific directions become disoriented when exposed to artificially shifted magnetic fields. They rely not just on sun and sky, but on the invisible geometry beneath them, the field lines of the planet itself. This sense, called magnetoreception, is still being studied. It's difficult to test, but evidence keeps mounting. And what's fascinating is how insects combine this ability with others, using multiple frames of reference: polarized light for direction, landmarks for navigation, magnetism for long-range orientation. It's a geometric toolkit, a way of building mental maps without ever drawing one. Ants, too, exhibit strange orientation behaviours. Desert ants, in particular, those navigating wide, featureless sand plains, seem to count steps, track angles, and use the magnetic field as a frame for their internal maps. Researchers placed magnets near nests and watched as the ants became confused, walking in wide loops or returning to the wrong spot. These aren't random walkers, they are geometrically attuned creatures. Not because they understand math, but because their lives depend on understanding space, and magnetism is just one more grid on which they sketch their movements. Imagine that, to walk the world with invisible lines beneath your feet, guiding every step. To fly not just through air, but through an unseen architecture, one written in magnetism, light, wind, and angle. It's geometry, again, just not the kind we can always see. There's a kind of light you can't see. It's all around you, bouncing off surfaces, streaming from the sun. It's called polarized light, and while our eyes ignore it, many insects use it like a celestial map. Especially bees, especially ants, especially the ones that live in hot, harsh places, where the sun is relentless and shadows are few. To them, the sky is not just blue, it's striped with lines of polarization, radiating out from the sun's position. Even when the sun is hidden behind a cloud, they can detect its direction by reading how the light is polarized in the sky dome. Bees do this with specialized photoreceptors in their compound eyes, arranged in patterns that are sensitive to the angle of incoming light waves. These cells allow them to triangulate their position, to determine direction, to align with the hive. When a forager bee returns to the colony and performs her waggle dance, she doesn't just describe distance and direction. She encodes it relative to the sun, and her internal sense of the sun's position is partly derived from polarized light. That's how she adjusts for the movement of the sun during the day, recalculating, correcting, compensating. It's like having a slide rule in her brain, tuned to the geometry of the sky. Other insects, like dung beetles, use this ability too. At night, some species navigate by the polarized light of the moon, even the Milky Way. They roll their dung balls in straight lines, guided by a star map, etched not in stars, but in polarization and angles. How is this possible? Again, it comes down to geometry. Light travels in waves. When it reflects off certain surfaces, like water, air, or particles, its waves align in specific directions. That alignment is polarization, and insects with the right receptors can see those directions. They use this invisible pattern to understand their place in the world, like grid lines on a globe. They don't do it consciously. They don't know the sky is polarized, but evolution has gifted them with the tools to decode it. And those tools create something astonishing, a sense of space that is mathematically informed. That's the key. Whether it's magnetic fields, polarized light, or body position, insects build their lives on invisible geometries. They don't name them, they don't study them, but they know them through movement, instinct, and patterned behavior. And we, trying to understand, are only now catching up. The insect doesn't need trigonometry, she is trigonometry. A living proof of nature's law. That geometry is not just something we learn. Sometimes it's something we're born into. Imagine a gap, a chasm between two branches, a slippery surface, a rising flood. To you, it's a challenge. To ants, it's a problem to be solved by geometry, but not with tools, not with string or twigs or leaves. No, they solve it with themselves. Fire ants, army ants, weaver ants. They all perform one of the most extraordinary architectural feats in nature. They build bridges out of living bodies. And these bridges aren't random chains. They're structures, with anchors, with tension points, with load-bearing architecture. Let's say a colony needs to cross a gap. Scout ants spread out, measure the space. Soon the first ants link legs and mandibles and form a suspended chain. Others pile on, climbing over, linking in. And as the bridge forms, something astonishing happens. They adjust the shape. If the bridge gets too long and sags, ants reposition to shorten the span. If more ants walk across and the load increases, ants thicken the structure at stress points. They're not told to do this. There's no overseer. Each ant responds to local tension, vibration, weight distribution. The result is a structure that behaves like a flexible cantilever, adapting in real time to movement and strain. Researchers studying these bridges found that the ants act as both builders and material. They balance efficiency, fewer ants committed to the bridge, with stability, strong enough to hold the crossing flow. They solve, in effect, a cost-benefit optimization problem. What's the shortest, strongest bridge we can make without using too many workers? That's math, that's engineering, that's geometry, performed with bodies, instinct, and feedback loops. They also build towers. Fire ants trapped in floods form vertical columns by clinging to each other, bodies shifting to spread the weight evenly. These living towers distribute pressure downward like load-bearing columns, adjusting as more ants pile on. No ant understands the whole. Each one feels a bit of strain. Each one moves, each one adjusts. And the structure persists, efficient, fluid, alive. Ants don't think in Euclid's theorems, but their bridges solve geometric problems every time they form. They are living geometry, dynamic, adaptable, recursive. Proof that in nature, structure isn't always built from stone or steel. Sometimes it walks across itself. High in the forest canopy, where the light flickers and the branches sway, another kind of builder goes to work. She is not laying bricks. She is not digging tunnels. She is stitching leaves together. Her name is the weaver ant, and her thread, silk. Not her own, but her larva's, and the way she uses it reveals yet another layer of insect geometry. Weaver ants construct their nests by bending living leaves toward each other and then gluing them together with silk. These are not haphazard bundles. They are spherical structures, smooth and enclosed, designed to hold hundreds of ants, brood, and queens. And the method? It's teamwork meets trigonometry. First, the ants form chains of bodies to pull leaves together, sometimes stretching their own limbs to the very limit. One ant grabs a leaf edge, another grabs her, and another, until the leaf is folded into position. This is load distribution in action. Then, while some ants hold the leaves still, others bring in larvae, gently pressing their abdomens against the leaf surface. The larvae secrete silk. The ants move them in arcs and loops, laying down ribbons of glue, like a seamstress guiding a needle. Where to place the silk, where it will maximize adhesion, distribute tension, and create stability. These aren't guesses, they're inherited rules, shaped by thousands of generations of trial and success. And the silk itself behaves in mathematically interesting ways. It stretches, it curls, it tightens as it dries. Like a tension cable, it holds the structure together through force balance, preventing the leaves from snapping apart when the wind sways. The nest ends up spherical or ovoid, minimizing surface area while maximizing volume. It sheds water, it resists tearing, and it's made entirely from leaves, bodies, and silk. The ants don't draw plans, they don't measure angles, but their decisions, moment to moment, where to pull, when to bend, how to hold, where to silk, result in a structure that solves spatial problems. It must be strong enough to hang from a branch, light enough not to pull the tree limb down, enclosed enough to protect the queen, open enough to allow airflow and temperature regulation, and they do it without ever seeing the whole. Just local cues, local needs, local corrections, and somehow it becomes architecture, elegant, efficient, green and living and geometric. Weaver ants remind us, not all builders use bricks. Some use silk, some use leaves, some use each other. And the design? It emerges like all great geometry does, from the interaction of force, form, and instinct. A single insect is a marvel. But when insects gather, something even stranger happens. They start to move like one. Not chaotically, not randomly, but in patterns, waves, spirals, lattices. And those patterns, when measured, reveal startling precision. Take the locust swarm. A biological force of nature, it can stretch for miles, with millions of individuals moving in dense formations across the land. To the eye, it's a blur. But zoom in, not with a camera, but with equations, and you'll see geometry. Locusts don't bump into each other. They don't collide. They maintain distance, turn with synchronicity, accelerate together. How? Simple rules: keep a certain distance, align with your neighbours, avoid obstacles. That's all. But when thousands follow these rules simultaneously, you get a self-organizing system. One that produces geometric formations, arcs, currents, spirals, front lines that ripple like waves of grass in the wind. This is not unique to locusts. You see it in midge clouds, where tiny flies form dense hovering columns that appear to pulse in and out like breathing machines. You see it in army ant raids, where columns stretch in wide fan shapes, narrowing at the rear, optimizing both search coverage and communication. You see it in firefly synchrony, where groups of males flash in unison, a light show that follows mathematical regularity. What unites all these? Distributed rules. Each insect only reacts to what's immediately around it. Yet from that limited view emerges something vast, something ordered, something that looks like a living equation. Biologists and mathematicians study these swarms with computer simulations. They find that even very basic algorithms can reproduce insect-like behavior if you build in the right parameters for space, movement, and response time. The result? Swarm models that mirror real life, and sometimes even predict it. Engineers use these models to design drone fleets, robotic teams, and crowd control systems, all inspired by what insects have been doing for millions of years. Not through knowledge, but through consistency, through interaction, through rules that, once followed collectively, give rise to geometry. A line becomes a wave becomes a form becomes function, and the swarm becomes more than the sum of its wings. Let's stop for a moment and consider how insects see, not what they see, how they see. Because their vision is not like ours. Their eyes aren't singular or smooth. They're made of facets, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of tiny hexagonal units called ommatidia. Each ommatidium is its own lens, capturing a small part of the world, pointing in a slightly different direction. Together they form a compound eye, and that compound eye is a geometric structure, a spherical array of hexagons tiled together like the surface of a soccer ball. But why hexagons? Because once again, hexagons tile a curved surface most efficiently. They provide wide-angle vision with minimal gaps between units. Each ommatidium delivers 1 pixel of the overall image, low resolution, but with high speed, motion sensitivity, and omnidirectional awareness. And it's not just about shape. The spacing and alignment of the ommatidia follow geometric rules, too. In flies, the arrangement of facets allows for motion detection so fine that they can react to a swatting hand before it finishes moving. In bees, the eye is specialized for color perception, especially in the ultraviolet range, revealing floral patterns invisible to us. And in dragonflies, their eyes wrap around the head like a helmet, nearly 360 degrees of vision, with specialized zones for different tasks. One for spotting prey, one for tracking movement, one for navigating. But here's what's most fascinating. The way these ommatidia are arranged follows principles of symmetry and optimal packing. Some insects even have regular hexagonal lattices, with each ommatidium at an equal distance from its neighbours, creating the most efficient sensory coverage for the size of the eye. Engineers have studied these arrangements to create artificial compound eyes, sensors that can detect movement from multiple angles simultaneously. They're used in surveillance, robotics, and even medical imaging, all because nature figured out that if you want to see everything, the best way to do it is with a geometrically organized array. Again, insects didn't plan this. They didn't evolve with a ruler in hand, but evolution selected for vision systems that maximize field, minimize blur, and provide fast, reactive input. And those systems are built on geometry, because shape matters, because angle matters, because arrangement defines function. So when you next catch a glimpse of a fly's eye in the sunlight, don't flinch. Look closely. You're staring into a geometric masterpiece, one crafted by nature, perfected over millennia, and made not of glass or mirrors, but of tiny living hexagons, watching the world unfold. In the world of insects, not all geometry is passive. Some of it is tactical, deliberate. The geometry of motion, angle, timing. Take the assassin bug, a predator with a name to match its method. It doesn't chase. It doesn't sting. It calculates. The assassin bug lurks, still and silent, on the edges of leaves or bark. When prey comes into range, a beetle, a caterpillar, another insect, it strikes with deadly accuracy. But here's where it gets interesting. Its strike is not guesswork. It's calibrated. Its long, needle-like rostrum, a kind of stabbing mouthpart, shoots forward in a straight line, precisely angled based on the prey's size, distance, and movement. Studies have shown that some predatory insects adjust their strike angle depending on environmental geometry, the angle of surfaces, the position of light, the movement of air. They make predictive calculations based on limited sensory input. They're not doing math in their heads, but they're acting like it. They gauge trajectory, they assess strike zone, they anticipate reaction time. All of it using a kind of embodied geometry, a feel for space and time honed by evolution. And it's not just assassin bugs. Praying mantises, those elegant patient hunters, rely on stereoscopic vision to determine depth. Unlike most insects, mantises have true binocular sight. They can tell how far away something is by comparing input from both eyes, just like humans. But they use it differently. Their world is not continuous. It's a series of strike or don't strike decisions. When the distance is right, and only then, they lunge, forelegs snapping out in an arc, closing around the target with measured precision. Their limbs aren't just fast, they're calibrated. A fraction of a degree too wide, and the prey escapes. A fraction too close, and the mantis overcommits. So they learn, they adjust, they repeat, and over time their movement becomes math. So here we are, again, in familiar territory, geometry as behaviour. Not the drawn kind, not the written kind, but the kind that lives in tendons, in reflexes, in the logic of motion. Even ambush spiders, those who don't spin webs, place themselves at intersections where prey is statistically more likely to pass, a kind of spatial probability map encoded into instinct. It's hunting by angle, hunting by pattern, and that too is geometry, not as shape, but as strategy. Geometry isn't always visual, sometimes it's audible, a cricket chirping in the dark, a cicada singing from the treetops, a katydid clicking under the leaves. Each sound is a message, a signal, a code, but beneath the code lies structure, and beneath that structure, geometry. Let's begin with the cricket. When it rubs its wings together, a behaviour called stridulation, it produces a rhythmic pulse of sound. This isn't random noise. Each wing has a comb-like ridge on one side and a scraper on the other. When drawn across each other, the ridges vibrate at specific frequencies, just like the strings of a violin. Those ridges are spaced evenly, with precise intervals between them. That spacing determines pitch. A geometric layout creates a musical tone. Now imagine millions of years of evolution adjusting the length, tension, and spacing of those ridges. Each species develops its own acoustic signature, a mating call that is unique, recognizable, and consistent. Cicadas do something similar, but louder, much louder. They use tymbals, thin membranes on the sides of their bodies, to generate sound. The geometry of the timbal, its shape, thickness, and curvature, controls the resonance, like a drumhead. Different species resonate at different frequencies, producing patterns that travel far through the air. Some even synchronize. Cicadas of the same species often emerge on prime-numbered year cycles, like 13 or 17 years, reducing overlap with predators. Prime numbers, of course, are a concept from mathematics, but here they emerge naturally as a biological strategy, a form of temporal geometry. And in katydids, their song is directional. By modulating wing position and body angle, they send chirps in focused beams, like sonar. Some even adjust their rhythm to avoid overlapping with neighbours, creating a kind of insect counterpoint, an acoustic dance shaped by spacing and timing. What does all this have to do with geometry? Well, consider what sound is, a wave, and waves follow patterns, frequency, amplitude, wavelength, phase, all describable through trigonometric curves, ratios, harmonics. So when an insect sings, it is creating a pattern in space and time, a geometry of vibration. And when another insect hears it and responds, that interaction is spatial, rhythmic, and rule-based. It's not random noise, and it's encoded meaning, and the code is shaped by the same principles that govern spirals, tessellations, and symmetry. So the next time you hear a cricket at night, know this. You're not just hearing a bug, you're hearing math made audible, the click of a limb, the spacing of ridges, the resonance of form. It is geometry with a beat. Let's come back to the hexagon, because by now you've seen it everywhere, in honeycombs, in compound eyes, in wing veins, egg clusters, and even behavioural patterns. But why? Why this shape? Why not squares? Why not circles? Why does the hexagon appear so often in insect biology? To understand that, let's go back, not to insects, but to the geometry itself. In two-dimensional space, there are only three shapes that can tile a surface without gaps: equilateral triangles, squares, regular hexagons, but among these, hexagons are special. They cover a plane with the least total perimeter for a given area. In other words, they use the least material to enclose the most space. It's efficient. Nature loves efficiency. And insects, especially those that build, store, or sense, benefit from that. Let's look again at the honeybee. A comb isn't just a nursery, it's a storage unit. It needs to hold brood, honey, pollen, and do it using as little wax as possible, because wax is costly to make. So if you're a bee and you're going to build hundreds of cells, you want a shape that's strong, one that shares walls, one that doesn't waste space. And the answer? The hexagon. It wasn't always assumed that bees chose hexagons for efficiency. Some early theories claimed bees first made circular cells, which then pushed into each other to become hexagonal. But detailed studies, both mathematical and experimental, suggest otherwise. Bees actively adjust their construction. They sense the angles, they fine-tune the layout. They don't do it by calculation, but the result? Hexagons, over and over again, and in other places too. Fly eyes use hexagonal ommatidia to maximize light detection per surface area. Wasp nests use hexagonal cells for brood chambers. Even some insect scales on wings follow hexagonal or hexagon-like packing. You could call it coincidence, but really it's constraint. When life has to pack, store, tile, or sense, it finds that the hexagon works best, so it stays. Passed down through genes, instincts, tiny adjustments that become tradition. It's not that insects know geometry, it's that geometry knows them. It rewards behaviours that favour certain shapes. Shapes that hold, shapes that fit, shapes that last. So when you spot a hexagon in the wild, in a bee's waxy home, in the tiny glint of a fly's eye, remember, you're seeing nature's most efficient compromise, a form born of limitation. And yet it's beautiful, elegant, precise. The hexagon appears not because it's simple, but because it's correct. Let's shift focus from the micro to the macro, from the cell to the landscape, because insects don't just build within structures, They build across terrain, and how they do that is another lesson in geometry. Take paper wasps. When they build their nests, typically under eaves, on branches, or hanging from beams, the placement isn't random. Studies have shown that wasp nests are often oriented to face east or southeast. Why? To catch the morning sun. A warmer start to the day means earlier foraging, faster development of brood, and reduced energy loss. This alignment has a name: solar orientation. It's geometric. It requires understanding the arc of the sun, the angle of the nest, and the relationship between form and function. And they're not alone. Ant colonies in arid regions often build their entrances with specific angular tilts, not straight up, not random, but carefully angled to reduce sun exposure during peak heat. This helps regulate internal temperature, keeps humidity balanced, prevents collapse. You see the same behaviour in termite mounds. In Australia, so-called magnetic termites build mounds with long flat faces aligned north-south, like giant earthen fins. This orientation minimises solar heating during the hottest part of the day, while still allowing warmth in the morning and evening. How do they do it? We don't fully know, but the result is clear: environmental geometry. Insects use the angles of light, the contours of land, and the arc of the sky to shape their homes. They don't need to understand why. They don't need diagrams, but their behaviour has been shaped by consequences. Poor orientation equals overheating. Bad placement is water damage. Wrong angle equals wind collapse. Over time, those who built better survived better. And that survival coded the rules deeper into instinct. Even beetles, when laying eggs in bark, follow spiral or grid patterns that maximise space and minimise overlap. Some moths fold their cocoons at specific angles to resist wind. Some butterflies choose leaf edges at geometric centres for balance. It's everywhere. A quiet respect for geometry, written in placement, preference, and performance. And it leaves us wondering, if a wasp builds at just the right angle to catch the sun, is she doing math, or is math doing her? Let's take to the skies, because insects don't just build geometry, they fly it. Watch a dragonfly for a few minutes. It doesn't just dart randomly. It curves, stalls, pivots mid-air, reverses, like a stunt pilot with an invisible flight plan. But what governs this motion? Beneath the buzzing and fluttering is something elegant: vector control, angle calculation, geometric navigation. Take bees, for example. When foraging, they don't fly aimlessly. They measure angular distances from the hive to the flower using the position of the sun. Then they return, often by a direct path, correcting as the sun moves. How do they compensate? Through internal angle adjustment. They keep track of the direction and duration of flight, integrating that with time of day, because they have a sense of circadian rhythm. They know where the sun should be, even when it isn't visible. This gives them a kind of insect trigonometry, navigating using invisible triangles formed between hive, sun, and destination. We call this path integration. They don't use a map. They calculate their position based on vectors, movement in a certain direction for a certain time. It's like having a compass in their nervous system. Ants use a similar strategy. Desert ants, in particular, can walk hundreds of meters in erratic winding paths, but when it's time to return, they walk straight back to the nest. No landmarks, just internal geometry. They're not retracing steps, they're calculating a home vector, one they've built internally based on each step taken, each turn made. Scientists call this a step integrator, a system that adds and subtracts angles and distances to yield a direct path home. Even more astonishing, some of these insects weigh their path, adjusting for elevation, wind drift, or tilted terrain, all without conscious awareness. It's not thought, it's embodiment. Their bodies carry geometry in their movement, and dragonflies, They take it a step further. They intercept prey mid-air. They don't chase. They calculate. By observing the trajectory of a flying mosquito, a dragonfly will turn not toward where the prey is, but toward where it will be, a geometric prediction called a constant bearing angle strategy. Missiles use it. So do bats, falcons, and sharks, but dragonflies were doing it first. They track prey velocity, estimate angle of interception, adjust their wings independently to bank or hover, and time their strike to the millisecond, all with a 200 millisecond reaction time. No radar, no vision blur, just pure geometry in motion. Now drop back to Earth. Let's look at legs, because even in walking, crawling, or climbing, insects carry geometry. Start with the tripod gait, the most stable walking pattern in six-legged insects. In this gait, insects lift and move 3 legs at a time, the front and back leg of one side, and the middle leg of the opposite side. The other 3 legs stay on the ground, forming a triangular base of support. This keeps the centre of mass within the triangle, the most stable geometric arrangement possible for locomotion. It's not taught, it's not learned. They hatch walking like this. A baby ant walks like an adult ant, because this gait is encoded, a biomechanical solution born from physics, not choice. Engineers have studied it in designing walking robots, using the same tripod patterns to create stable movement over rough terrain. Even when an insect loses a leg, it adapts by forming new geometric gaits, favouring angles that maintain balance. And then there's adhesion. Tree-dwelling insects like beetles, stick insects, and flies must cling to vertical surfaces, even ceilings. How? Tiny hairs called setae on their feet. Each seta ends in multiple tips, like a bundle of micro-hooks or pads, which spread over a surface and generate van der Waals forces, or capillary adhesion. The number, spacing, and shape of these hairs is geometric. Angle of approach, pressure distribution, contact area. The hairs are aligned in grids, often hexagonal or spiral, optimized for maximum contact with minimum effort. Some insects even adjust leg angles depending on the surface, curling or spreading to match curvature. This is not randomness, it's the architecture of motion. A beetle climbing a twig is solving equations with its feet. A praying mantis reaching for prey calculates strike arcs with its limbs. A grasshopper, preparing to jump, stores energy in its femur and releases it along an angle calculated by lever mechanics. They don't do the math, but they live by it. Every leg that moves, every joint that bends, every angle that flexes is a calculation made flesh. So whether in the air or on the ground, whether with wings or with feet, insects perform geometry not as theory, but as life, and every movement is a proof. We've been asking why insects know geometry, but maybe that's not the right question. Maybe we should ask how geometry came to know insects. Because in every example, from hexagonal combs to flight vectors to compound eyes, there's a quiet sculptor at work, evolution. Not with a chisel, not with a pencil, but with pressure, with time, with the shaping force of natural selection. Let's think of evolution not just as a story of survival, but as a geometric filter. When millions of tiny choices play out over millions of years, only those forms that work, that fit, that hold, that move well, are kept. Wings that don't catch the wind are discarded. Legs that slip on leaves are eliminated. Eyes that can't track motion fail to pass on genes. And what do the survivors have in common? Structure, symmetry, efficiency, the very things that geometry describes. So over time, insect bodies evolve toward those principles. Not because they understand them, but because those that accidentally stumbled into geometric solutions lived longer, found mates, left more behind. This is how we get the bilateral symmetry of nearly all insects. It makes movement predictable, efficient. It's why the segmental body plan emerged, modular, repeatable, adaptable. It's why spiral veins in wings evolved, to distribute stress without snapping. It's why the tripod gait remains dominant, because it keeps the insect from falling. Evolution doesn't love geometry because it's beautiful. It selects it because it works. Every curve, every angle, every tessellation you see in an insect's life, it's a fossil record of what didn't fail. And once a successful geometric trait appears, it tends to stick because it provides a reliable platform to build on. Think of it like scaffolding, geometry as the base upon which diversity grows. That's why you see the same hexagons, triangles, radial patterns, symmetries appearing again and again in species separated by continents and millions of years. These aren't trends, they're solutions, and solutions once found are hard to beat. So when we look at insects and marvel at how mathematical they seem, we're really marveling at the power of iteration, a slow, relentless drawing of better shapes, over eons, with no compass, no equations, only feedback, only function, only survival. And the shapes that remain are the ones that could withstand the eraser. Section 22. Insect camouflage and the geometry of disappearance. So far we've talked about how insects use geometry to build, fly, sense and survive. But there's another use of geometry we haven't yet explored. A quiet one, an invisible one, camouflage. To disappear in plain sight, to match leaf veins, mimic bark textures, align with light angles, is not magic. It's design. It's geometry deployed in reverse. Let's start with the leaf insect. Not just green, not just flat, but veined, crinkled, irregular at the edges. It's not pretending to be a leaf in a cartoon sense. It's matching the fractal complexity of real leaves, the way they branch, the way light falls on them, the way edges erode. Fractals are a kind of geometry, repeating patterns at different scales, and leaf insects have evolved bodies that mirror those fractal forms. Their deception works not because they're still, but because they match geometry across multiple levels. Shape, texture, pattern and movement. Yes, movement. Some even sway like leaves in the wind, adding dynamic camouflage. Others, like stick insects, align their limbs to the branches they rest on. Some even rest at angles that minimize shadow distortion, using orientation as part of the illusion. Then there are moths, with wings that resemble tree bark, not just in colour, but in line geometry, matching the cracks, striations, and lichen growth patterns on specific trees. Some moths even rest with wings folded at exact angles that match those natural features. The match isn't perfect, but it's good enough to fool a predator's pattern detectors. In nature, vision relies on edge detection, on spotting contrast, line breaks, motion. So if an insect's body can blend its outlines, reduce edges, and match background geometry, it becomes functionally invisible. And that is a geometric strategy, not an active one, not consciously deployed, but one shaped by generations of selection. Insects that didn't blend in were eaten. Insects that did survived. And those that survived passed on the angles, the contours, the colours, until their children were born as living equations of invisibility. Even butterflies, those bright, fluttering flags of the forest, use this. Some have eye spots, false circles on their wings that mimic predator eyes or distract attacks away from the body. Those circles aren't just decorative, they're calculated, placed at angles that draw focus, sized to trigger hesitation. It's not art, it's optical manipulation. And that too is geometry. So when we say camouflage, don't think only of colour. Think of form, think of angle, think of space. To vanish is not to disappear. It is to belong so completely to the geometry of the background that your presence becomes just another pattern in the world. Stand in a garden. Let a butterfly land near you. Now pause. Look. Each wing, delicate, coloured, veined, is a mirror of the other. Left to right, top to bottom, the same arcs, the same markings, the same division of space. But this isn't decoration, it's symmetry. And symmetry is geometry's signature. In biology, bilateral symmetry is one of the most common body plans. It means the left and right halves are reflections of each other. And for insects, it starts in the womb, or rather, in the egg. As the embryo develops, it follows morphogen gradients, chemical signals that diffuse across the growing body and guide development. These gradients operate symmetrically, which is why insects end up with paired wings, matched limbs, aligned antennae. But why symmetry? What's the benefit? Let's go back to flight. A butterfly with mismatched wings cannot steer. A dragonfly with asymmetrical veins spins off course. Symmetry ensures balanced lift, stable yaw, even drag. It's not just pretty, it's functional, and this is true across the board. Insects with two wings, like flies, still have symmetrical halteres, tiny knobbed organs that vibrate during flight and detect rotation. Insects with four wings, like moths or dragonflies, keep their wing pairs synchronized with matching patterns and structures to control turbulence. Even beetles, whose hard elytra, wing covers, seem decorative, have symmetrical ridges and joints that lock in place during rest or flight. And then there's the art of it, the markings. The eye spots on a butterfly's wings, placed equidistant from the midline. The stripes of moths, flowing in mirrored arcs. They're not just camouflage or mating signals, though they are that too. They are optical stabilizers. Predators that track movement are easily confused by symmetry. A predator lunges toward one wing, thinking it's the body, and misses. Symmetry also makes recognition easier, both for mates and for humans. We see it, we trust it, we're drawn to it, because our brains are geometry machines too. Even broken symmetry has a purpose. Some insects introduce slight asymmetries to startle predators or mislead their attacks. But the base geometry remains. Two sides, one shape, and a mirror. So when a butterfly flutters by and you marvel at how it floats, know that its grace is not just colour or lightness, it's the mathematics of matching. And in those mirrored wings, you see not just beauty, but equilibrium. Can an insect count? Not in the way you do. No fingers, no numbers, no digits or decimals. But can it distinguish quantity? Can it track steps, spaces, intervals? Yes, and it does so using a kind of geometry of awareness. Let's start with the desert ant. We've talked about how it can walk in erratic paths for long distances and still return home in a straight line. But how? It turns out it counts. Steps are not consciously, not with numbers, but with internal pacing. When researchers gave ants tiny stilts, literally extending their legs, the ants overshot their nest. When their legs were shortened, they stopped short. This means ants calculate distance by the length and number of their steps. That's a kind of internal ruler, a spatial metric based on self. Not only that, they adjust based on environmental scale. Put them in a tunnel with repeating patterns on the walls, and they'll estimate distance based on the number of patterns they pass. It's not counting, it's pattern recognition. A geometric memory of how far is how many. Bees do something similar. In flight tests, bees trained to reach a reward at a certain distance could still do so even when visual cues were changed. They were tracking relative distance, using optic flow, angle shifts, and timing. In other words, how the environment moves past them as they move through it. This creates a kind of mental map, not in numbers, but in spatial units. And spiders? They construct webs with precise spacing between anchor points, adjusting thread angles and spacing to match the size of the gap. If disturbed, they reconstruct the web to scale, preserving the proportion of spirals even if the web is smaller or larger. This suggests an internal sense of proportion, a flexible blueprint. Even caterpillars seem to show interval awareness. Some species, when navigating, stretch forward, attach, then release the rear, always maintaining equal arc lengths between steps, like a walking compass. What's the takeaway? Insects may not count in the human sense, but they quantify. They measure space, time, and movement using inborn references: how far their legs reach, how many steps between 2 points, how long it takes to fly from light to dark. That's not arithmetic, that's embodied geometry. And maybe that's all counting really is at the root. Not symbols, but relationships. The spacing between things, the rhythm of experience. And insects have known that long before numbers were carved into stone. Let's cross a thread now into a different realm. Not insects, technically, but their close kin, spiders. Because if you want to witness pure living geometry, watch a spider build a web. There's no ruler, no compass, no blueprint on parchment. But somehow, in a single night, a creature the size of your thumbnail can spin a structure with perfect radial symmetry, logarithmic spirals, and load-bearing tension, all from silk and instinct. Let's look closely. A typical orb web starts with an anchor thread, cast across a gap, catching on both sides. From there, the spider builds a Y-shaped framework, followed by radial spokes, like the spokes of a wheel. Then comes the spiral. First, a non-sticky spiral, wide loops used to set spacing. Then, starting from the outside in, the spider lays down the sticky spiral, where prey will eventually be caught. This sticky spiral follows a path not unlike the logarithmic spiral seen in seashells, galaxies, and sunflower heads, a curve that expands proportionally and evenly. Why this shape? Because it maintains equal spacing between turns, while getting tighter toward the center. That means prey, no matter where it hits, has a higher chance of being intercepted between spirals. It's a geometrically optimal trap. And the radial lines? They're not just supports, they act like signal wires. When something hits the web, vibrations travel along these spokes, guiding the spider directly to the impact point with astonishing accuracy. The angles between spokes are evenly spaced, maximizing coverage and maintaining tension across the structure. Too few spokes and the web sags, too many, and the structure becomes too dense to feel vibrations clearly. So the spider calibrates. Each web is a compromise between visibility, strength, cost, and sensitivity. Some even adjust the geometry based on recent weather. If wind has been strong, they'll build smaller webs with tighter spirals. If prey has been scarce, they may stretch the web wider, using thinner silk to maximize surface area. These changes aren't learned in the human sense. They're embodied responses, biological algorithms, but the outcome is undeniable. A spider web is not just a trap, it's a mathematical object built with attention to angle, symmetry, spacing, tension, curvature. We call it instinct, but what is instinct if not geometry passed down through time? A survival equation encoded in DNA. So the next time you see a web sparkling in morning dew, pause, don't brush it away. You're looking at an architecture of air, a design built from nothing but knowledge woven in thread. It's not just beautiful, it's functional, it's perfectly geometric. What's the best way to survive? Sometimes it's not hiding, sometimes it's pretending to be something else. Insects are masters of mimicry, a kind of biological illusion. And like all good illusions, it's built on angles, shapes, and the physics of perception. Let's take the hoverfly. It's harmless, no sting, no venom, but it looks almost exactly like a wasp. Black and yellow bands, a similar silhouette. Even its flight path mimics the wasp's jittery zigzag. To predators, it's convincing enough. Why risk it? Better to leave it alone. But look closer. The mimicry isn't just about colour. It's about geometry of form. Hoverflies evolved to match the angle of the thorax, the width of the waist, and the length of the antennae of wasps, to fool predators that rely on shape recognition. It's optical geometry, a way to exploit the visual processing systems of birds and lizards. And then there's the mantis orchid, an orchid that doesn't just look like a flower. It's evolved in concert with an actual insect, the orchid mantis. The mantis mimics the orchid mimics other flowers, and pollinators fall for both. But what makes it work? Proportion, symmetry, colour angles. To the compound eye of a bee or butterfly, the mantis looks like a flower because its limb positions and body ratios align with the insect's expectation of a floral shape. That's geometry used as deception. Another example? The dead leaf moth. It folds its wings at exactly the right angle to cast shadows, like curled leaf edges. It even mimics the central midrib, the long vein down the middle of a leaf, using pigmentation that runs straight through the body. It's not just the appearance, it's the 3D positioning. Some even flutter down like falling leaves, twisting mid-air to imitate leaf motion. So now geometry is not just shape, it's motion path, descent angle, rotation rate, even flicker frequency, and the payoff? To a predator scanning for prey, it all blends into the background. The insect disappears not by hiding, but by replacing itself with something else. A leaf, a thorn, a wasp, a flower. And the cost of failure? Immediate. The illusion has to be good enough, not for a camera, but for an attacking beak. And that means evolution has fine-tuned these imposters with ruthless precision. Because mimicry isn't art, it's strategy. A geometric manipulation of angles, edges and colour breaks. A lie told in form, and one that often saves a life. Let's zoom out again, not to the wings, not to the eyes, but to the colony. Because geometry doesn't just exist in physical structures, it also lives in social structures. In how insects organise, divide labour, and coordinate tasks, sometimes with mathematical efficiency. Let's take the honeybee hive, not just a collection of bees, but a superorganism, where each individual functions like a cell in a body. There's geometry here too. The division of roles, workers, drones, queen, creates a triadic structure. 3 main castes, each with a defined spatial function. The queen at the centre, laying eggs, the workers circling her, tending to brood, storing honey, foraging outside. The drones, fewer in number, often at the edge or in waiting areas. Their positions in the hive form concentric layers of activity, a spatial hierarchy that optimizes both protection and efficiency. In leafcutter ants, the caste system is even more dramatic. You'll find tiny miners collecting leaf fragments, media workers cutting them down, and majors, massive tank-like ants, guarding the trails. They operate on a modular pattern. Each group works within its own zone, like rooms in a geometric factory. The nest layout? More structured than you'd think. Chambers for fungus gardens, waste disposal, egg nurseries, all arranged by ventilation gradients, temperature regulation, and traffic flow. Termite mounds take this even further. Their towers aren't just piles of dirt, they're air-conditioned skyscrapers, designed to regulate temperature through a system of vertical and horizontal shafts. Hot air rises, cool air flows in, and somehow, without blueprints, the termites build it that way. How? By following local geometric rules. When a termite feels a difference in humidity, it places a mud ball at a certain angle. Another adds to it, a third adjusts it, and over time, a macro structure emerges. It's like building a cathedral, one decision at a time. And what's even more stunning, these societies scale. An ant colony of 10,000 individuals can still coordinate seamlessly, as if governed by a single mathematical brain. Researchers call it stigmergy, coordination through environmental cues. No one gives orders, but everyone acts based on position, distance, and time. That's geometry, not as art, not as architecture, but as governance. Let's be clear. Geometry in insects isn't always perfect. Sometimes it fails. Because nature doesn't seek beauty, it seeks utility. And when environments change, sometimes the once perfect pattern becomes a trap. Let's talk about extreme specialization. Take an insect that has evolved to mimic a single species of flower. Its mouth parts are the exact length of the flower's nectar tube. Its flight path aligns with the flower's position. Its life cycle is timed to the bloom, a perfect match, a perfect geometric key to a biological lock. But what happens when the flower goes extinct? The geometry becomes useless. The insect starves. It's not just a story of loss, it's a cautionary tale. Even the most intricate structures, wings, eyes, hive layouts, become liabilities if the environment shifts. That hexagonal comb, useless if the wax source disappears. That spiderweb spiral, ineffective if prey evolves to dodge the pattern. That camouflage geometry, broken if trees shed their leaves too early. And here's the kicker. Evolution can't predict. It only optimizes for the now. So geometry, for all its elegance, becomes a snapshot, a solution to a specific moment in time, frozen in DNA. And that's a kind of fragility. The butterfly with perfect eye spots may be outcompeted by a faster flying cousin. The mantis with symmetrical limbs may be undone by a new predator that attacks from beneath. And so the geometry breaks, not catastrophically, but quietly. One failed hunt at a time, one missed mating, one unbuilt nest, until that shape, once perfect, fades from the world. And something else takes its place. A new form, a new pattern, a new geometry. So even in failure, the process continues. Because nature doesn't stop drawing, it just turns the page. Let's step out of the forest, out of the hive, into the lab, because the geometry of insects isn't just fascinating, it's useful. Engineers, architects, designers, they've all looked to insect geometry for biomimicry. Take drones, for instance, small aerial robots with compound eye-inspired vision systems, allowing them to see in wide angles, detect motion rapidly, and fly through complex terrain, just like a bee in a forest, or robotic swarms, programmed using the same rules ants follow. Stay close, avoid collision, follow gradient trails. These robots can explore disaster zones, map environments, or deliver supplies, all without a central controller. The principles, taken directly from stigmergy and insect pathfinding. Or consider building design. Some architects have modelled air circulation systems on termite mounds, creating skyscrapers that stay cool without air conditioning. Just passive airflow, just geometry. Even in materials science, beetle shells and moth scales have inspired lightweight, ultra-strong structures, layering hexagonal or spiral designs to distribute force and absorb impact. And medicine? Yes, even there. The sticky pads of beetle feet have inspired surgical adhesives. The spacing of butterfly wing scales has been copied in anti-counterfeiting technology, creating light diffracting surfaces impossible to replicate without precision. We build with what we observe, and insects, they've been solving the same problems we face, with less material, less energy, and more elegance. What's left is for us to listen, to observe, to mimic not just the structure, but the principle behind it. Efficiency, symmetry, flexibility, modularity, adaptation. In a way, we are translating their geometry, turning silk threads into fiber optics, wing veins into suspension bridges, ant trails into algorithms, and in doing so, we're not just studying insects, we're partnering with them across the gap of species, across the gulf of scale, through the language of geometry. So here we are, at the end of our winding path through wings and webs, eyes and earth, buzzes and blueprints. What have we really seen? Insects are not mathematicians. They don't write theorems. They don't draw diagrams. And yet, they live by geometry. They build it, fly it, sing it, shape themselves and their world in perfect, repeatable, functional patterns. They don't need to know the names. They just need to move, live, survive, and let the math sort itself out. And it does. So what does this mean for us? Maybe it means design isn't always something we invent. Maybe it's something we inherit, something we observe in the folds of a wing, in the path of an ant, in the threads of a web. Maybe the cleanest architecture isn't the one we dream up in solitude. Maybe it's the one nature has been sketching for millions of years, across leaves and branches and sky. Insects show us what happens when form serves function so precisely it becomes beautiful, not by intention, but by inevitability. And so we marvel at the six-legged engineers, the silk-slinging architects, the silent surveyors of space and line and curve. Their work is not artifice, it is truth in shape. And we, the curious mind watching, can only smile. Because in every beat of a wing, in every hexagon drawn in wax, in every spiral caught in dew, we glimpse something universal. We glimpse the mind of the cosmos, drawn not in stars, but in the geometry of insects.